We're going to talk now to Lord Matt Ridley, of course, about some of those things as well. Matt, very good morning to you. Welcome.
Very good to see you.
Nice to see you. While we were on the subject of the misinformation unit, I don't know whether you were on it, but we were all a bit shocked. I mean, we knew that there was a sort of Neil O'Brien-inspired sort of COVID policing of some of what we were doing here at TalkTV, but we didn't actually realise there was a specific unit set up by Oliver Dowden until last week, or the beginning of this week. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it?
I think it's absolutely shocking. I think we knew that some of this was going on, but the degree to which elected politicians who are supposed to be representing the ordinary people instead represented the interests of the civil servants, of the establishment officials, and said, what we want is to shut down debate, impose policies that we think are right, and attack people or suppress people who we don't think are right. Now, we knew during the pandemic that there were mistaken things being said from that podium in number 10, because we could tell within weeks that they were wrong. Now, that didn't mean that they were evil. It just meant that we ought to be able to challenge them. And at the end of 2021, when the scientists tried to push the UK government into a further lockdown over Christmas, if you remember, they came out with very strong predictions that there would be 6,000 deaths a day in January if they didn't. Boris Johnson held his nerve against that. There wasn't a lockdown, and there were nothing like. There wasn't even 1/20th as many deaths. So we had good examples of where you did need challenge, you did need debate, you did need to hear both sides of the argument, and there was a strong attempt to prevent that happening.
It really was. And of course, we all remember that at the time, their excuse for doing that was that, well, we should all be relieved that that didn't happen. Well, no, because if you'd locked down and people had lost even more than we now know that we did lose, that would have been a dreadful sort of miscalculation, and it would have been a terrible mistake, because we now know also from the lockdown report that came out earlier on in the week from the IEA that the 400,000 prediction of deaths was actually so far out that it turned out only to be less than 2,000.
Well, I think that lockdown report is very good. I think it's done by seriously good academics in Denmark, Sweden, and the US. I noticed the Science Media Centre trying to rubbish it, lining up a few establishment scientists to say, oh, this is just from the IEA. They would say that anyway. Well, no, I'm sorry, that's not the way it works in a free society. You debate reports on their merits, not on who
Also, I read a piece which was written by some guy in Forbes magazine online who was trying to rubbish it on the basis that, oh, yeah, all the right-wingers are claiming that this is being produced by Johns Hopkins University. It hasn't. It's been produced by one professor at... Well, so what? He's a professor at Johns Hopkins University. Why would you trash that?
Steve Hankey's a very distinguished economist, and he's got an extremely distinguished academic record. Just because he holds this view doesn't mean you should outlaw him. And this is what's happening the whole time these days on lots of different issues. Certain people say, this is right, that is wrong. Anyone who says otherwise should be suppressed or is in somehow an illegitimate person who shouldn't be listened to. I mean, I've been called a climate denier for 20 years now. I've covered climate change for nearly 40 years, since I was science editor of The Economist in the 80s. I'm not a denier, I'm a lukewarmer. I say that climate change is real, it's happening, and we probably need to do something about it, but we mustn't overreact, and it's not happening as badly as some people say, and the extremist solutions are going to do more harm than good. Now, that seems to me a middle-of-the-road position, but I'm constantly portrayed as an extremist and suppressed.
Yes.
You know,
well, we now live in a world, Matt, don't we? We now live in a world where you're an extremist if you say you don't think a woman can have a penis. So, I mean, that's sort of madness that we're surrounded by. Because I was reading a piece, somebody sent me a piece, because the Just Stop Oil Brigade have been out and about, of course, again. And that girl, Phoebe, who was arrested, was dragged off by the police again because she broke the agreement that she made with the probation people not to go to any street protest again or something. But she was basically talking about millions of people dying and, you know, the world burning up before our very eyes. And I just said it's a joke, you know, some of this madness that they come out with. And so I was sent an article from The Guardian from about a month ago in which it quotes a man by the name of Matthew England, a climate scientist at the University of New South Wales, who looks at the temperature of the ocean going up by 0.1 of a degree since the start of, since about 10 years ago or something. And he says the current trajectory looks like it's headed off the charts, smashing previous records. Well, it's not actually off the charts. It's a very small increase, which may or may not be temporary.
Well, we are in a warming period. That means records get broken. Of course it does. Nobody's denying that. But by the way, the warming is happening considerably slower than was forecast in the 1990s. We were told to expect 0.3 degrees of warming per decade, plus or minus 0.2. Right. We've actually seen below the bottom of that range. We've seen 0.17 degrees of warming in the 30 plus years since then. So anybody who tells you it's warming faster than expected is wrong. Right. It is warming. It is an issue. It's not warming as fast as expected. We've got time to deal with it. We mustn't cut off our nose to spite our face and do something that actually does more harm, which we are doing. A lot of the policies we're taking are going to cause real economic and moral harm to people on the basis of these extreme suggestions from Extinction Rebellion and people like that. Extinction Rebellion took me to Ipso for an article I wrote in the Times the other day about walruses and sea ice. I proved that I was right and they were wrong with lots of data. And they were humiliated. You know, they were completely wrong. But if they'd gone the other way, they'd have been crowing about it. As it is, it's not an issue.
No, exactly right. But the trouble with all these net zero sort of manoeuvres is that it's almost like net zero is the new lockdown, isn't it? Because we know from that report that we've just talked about that the lockdown had terrible economic effects, terrible mental health effects on the population as well. And net zero, like you were saying, you know, it's all very well to talk about possibly doing something about climate change, but charging people 15 quid to drive into London isn't going to change anything, is it?
No, and there was an interesting report the other day showing that the air quality is far worse in the tube.
Yeah, of course.
You know, we blow our nose and you come out the tube and it's black, than it is on the streets. So if you want to do something about air quality in London, then that's where you should start.
Yeah.
No, net zero is responsible for some truly horrifying, damaging policies that are being pushed through, in which the government is picking winners in terms of technologies, things like heat pumps. I talked to a plumber the other day who says he's taking out 2 heat pumps a week now from people who put them in and discovered they didn't really work. You know, we really are committing economic suicide based on net zero at the time. Now, when they pushed through net zero as a 2050 commitment in Parliament, I stood up in the House of Lords, and I was pretty well the only one to do so, saying this is a serious mistake. Please, let's think again. Yeah. Let's be flexible about this. Let's have some aspirations. But if you make this a legal target, you will just reward the rich at the expense of the poor, the people who are best at grabbing the government's attention with their half-baked technologies, and they won't work, etc., etc. That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, it is hiding to nothing, I think you'll agree with me on. Thank you very much indeed. Matt Ridley there, former Conservative peer, on the subject of net zero and what the latest manoeuvrings